So what is interaction design? So we're going to talk about some bad designs, why this is important. So what's a formal definition of interaction design? Well, that's one of those things where you actually find, again, there's some mild disagreement. You'll find different definitions. So Sharp, Rogers, and Priest, that's a textbook that they used to use in this class that I don't use anymore, but still, good book, just a little outdated. Designing interactive products that support the way people communicate and interact in their everyday and working lives. So how do we interact with our environment? The design of spaces for human communication and interaction. These are very social things that we do as humans. We are interacting with our environment. And that really is what interaction design looks at. But it does have a very specific goal that pretty much everyone agrees on. We want to develop usable products. So we want to look at usability. We want things that are easy to learn, that are very effective when we're using them, that provide an enjoyable experience. So that we want to use our products. And again, as I'm going to tell you 10 million times in this semester, to do that, what do you need to do? Involve users. If you walk out of this class with remembering nothing else, I want you to remember user-centered design and goal-directed design, which is involving your users. Now, if you actually look at industry, because sometimes students will say, well, you know, I did a job search on interaction design, I didn't find much. If you look in industry, you actually will find a lot of terms that are used for this area. So user interface design, software design, user-centered design, product design, web design, and more recently, user experience design. Now, some will argue that interaction design is actually the umbrella that covers all of these. So it's a more general term. And as I've mentioned previously, there are a lot of disciplines that go into this, a lot of fundamental disciplines. One of the things you want to make sure that you do when you are looking at the type of design, such as the use of some of these terminology, is read the description of what is wanted, because it's going to vary. You may have two descriptions of a job for user experience design that are completely different from each other. Or you may have a description of a position for user experience design that is the exact same thing as user interface design. Now, you go into industry and you'll have people arguing all the time about how they're different and this person is wrong and that person is right and blah, blah, blah. You can argue about that all day. But the core aspect of this you want to remember is this is how we as humans interact with the world and digital products. And you have to read to see what it is that people are referring to. Now, I had mentioned previously, for those of you who missed the first couple of classes, that all of this involves many, many different areas, many, many different fields. How many of you remembered me saying that I'm going to think about making you actually memorize my nice diagram with all these different areas that go into interaction design? Who wants me to do that? No? Okay, I'll be nice. You don't actually need to memorize it. But I do generally want you to know, see, aren't I nice? I'm just so nice sometimes. But what I really want you to remember is that when you go into the IT field, you are going to be dealing with people from different backgrounds. In this area in particular, there will be people from all over the place. Graphic design, information systems, ergonomics, the social sciences, various academic disciplines. Even if you don't go into user experience, you are going to be working in teams. And especially if you work for one of the larger companies, you are going to have multidisciplinary teams. Those multidisciplinary teams are going to include people who are not necessarily IT people. They may have more of a background in psychology or more of a background in design. So they may be the artistic type. And do you think you have a choice as to whether you work with them or not? Yeah, no. In fact, they're going to expect you to work well. Now, this has some really great benefits. Right? You're more social, you meet more people, you expand your horizons. And for the design itself, it tends to generate more ideas, a wider variety of potential designs. It's much more likely you're going to come up with something that's innovative because you have people who think about things in a different manner and approach things in a different way. And the way you find innovation is not some light bulb that suddenly goes off in your head because you're a brilliant genius. It's because you come up with a lot of different ideas and those ideas evolve. That is how you come up with innovation. So working in these multidisciplinary teams can be awesome and a lot of fun. It can also be really frustrating. Probably are more familiar with the frustrating part. What do you think are some of the negatives of working with multidisciplinary teams?
Sometimes maybe you're gonna agreeing to one specific aspect of maybe the product. Maybe you all have completely different ideas of what the product outcome should be.
Right, so you may have different ideas about what the product outcome would be. You're having difficulty coming to a consensus because you're coming from different perspectives. And something that's more important to you may not necessarily be what's most important to someone else in the team. So it can create some, I don't want to say conflict, a little bit of discourse that you have to work through. What's another example? Yes?
Every field has like their own jargon, so it's going to be hard to get an idea across if you don't know like everyone's jargon that they use for whatever product you're trying to make.
Yeah, and that actually is a really, really big issue when it comes to not only cross-disciplinary teams, but design in general. Because we all have our own jargon in terms of our specific areas. And if you don't understand all of their jargon and they don't understand all of your jargon, you're going to really have a lot of communication issues. So communication issues tend to be a really big issue when it comes to working in teams, actually whether it's multidisciplinary or not. So when you are working in a team, you also need to learn about what is the field in the realm that you're dealing with. And you as IT people are also going to need to learn, how do I talk to someone who is non-technical? Because we're so used to talking to people who have the same knowledge or are in the same domain as us that we kind of forget that some people may not really know what a database is. Actually, some IT people don't know what a database is, but that's a whole other story. I'll tell you about that later in the semester. So you want to make sure that you deal effectively with those soft skills, like communication. But again, don't look at working in teams as some horrible, horrible thing like we usually do. It actually can be a lot of fun, and it can really help drive innovation. Now, another question that students often ask me is, okay, well, this is a new field. Are there really jobs out there? And are there companies that do this? Well, there actually are. I've already mentioned that a lot of the larger companies have entire divisions that this is all they do. There are also consulting companies that this is all they do. These are just a few of some of the major companies. So there's the Nielsen Norman Group. The Cooper, who wrote your book, by the way, he is a consultant. I told you that book is actually not a textbook, it's from industry. Swim, IDEO. There are numerous companies out there. And they really look at interaction design from a very similar perspective. So it's to help companies enter the age of the consumer, designing human-centered products and services. From research and product to goal-related design. It provides a wide range of design services, in each case targeted to address the product development needs at hand. And it creates products, services, and environments for companies pioneering new ways to provide value to their customers. So this area is actually seen as a way of bringing a new world to consumers. It's actually a very young area. There are a lot of pioneers out there that are still actually quite young. Now, just very quickly, if you want to look in the field in terms of what different people do, well, you have a lot of different definitions. These are some of the traditional definitions. But again, as I said, you actually have to look these days at the job descriptions because people don't have a full understanding of how these are defined, and those definitions are changing. So you may hear about interaction designers. These tend to be people that are involved in the design of all the interactive aspects of a product. There are usability engineers. That term is actually becoming more and more common. People who focus on evaluating products using usability methods and principles. What's really interesting about usability engineers, if you look at the different major companies, they each have a different definition of what a usability engineer is when you look at the specifics. Oracle has a different definition from Microsoft, who has a different definition from Google, who has a different definition from Apple. Quite interesting. They all change. So sometimes I'll have people who come to me and say, I have a usability engineer position. Do you know anyone? What do you think my response is? Yeah, what do you mean? Define it. How are you defining usability engineer? Web designers, here I'm not talking about the 12-year-old who's sitting there with, I guess what used to be front page. I don't know what the new one is. You know, just kind of dropping and dragging things. Oh, it looks pretty. I'm not talking about those web designers. I'm talking about real web designers. People who develop and create the visual design of websites, such as layouts. Information architects. This is a position that you will still see that's been around probably even longer. And these are people who come up with ideas of how to plan and structure interactive products. What they do is they actually will look at what type of information are you trying to convey to someone, and they help map out, for example, the layout of a website. How do you organize it in terms of where do you put what information where? How do you determine who your users are and what they're going to try to accomplish? Something as simple as an e-commerce site, which actually is not so simple, how do you categorize your products? What do you do when you have a product that fits in multiple categories? And importantly, what types of users are going to be coming to your website? Are they technical users or are they lay people? It's going to make a difference. And more recently, user experience designers, also known as UX. And they have a tendency to do really a lot of these things. They tend to work with user experience researchers, as well as with the product developers, with the coders, and the system designers to kind of put all this together and develop a nice design for the product. Now, I think I mentioned this before. One of the things that people often ask is, user experience designers, do they need to code? The answer is actually no. There are two different skill sets. It is very rare to find someone who can both code and design well. On occasion, you'll find one, but they're rare. And one of the things that I find when I look at job postings is I can tell how experienced and how knowledgeable someone is about UX based on what they wrote in that job description. If they're looking for someone who does both, then you're dealing with someone who is not familiar with user experience.